I begin by welcoming Professor Ranabir Chakravarti to give this lecture, and also invite all the participants, those who are going to listen to this great lecture. And uh, me as Professor Ramanamurthy, I'm a Dean, School of Economics. We are jointly organizing this, and I'm so grateful to Varghese to say that we are jointly organizing, because our role is more an audience, an earnest audience, and then you may wonder what is this economist doing here. I need to give an explanation that I'm personally I'm a political economist, and always believed in the institutions which are important to understand any development, let alone economic development. And economics as a discipline has understood least about the kind of institutions which are get involved in establishing the institutions of trust in the process of establishing trade and transport, etc. And we essentialize on prices, investment, etc. Those kind of factors, which are standard factors, but which are definitely are necessary factors, but most often they are not sufficient factors to explain the trade and economics of things that happen. So we are here to learn all those the nature of contingent factors which get involved, and we look forward to learn a lot from you, sir. And even our teacher, Dr. Ramchandra Rao, has joined, who teaches economic history, and we are quite earnest in our effort to attend this series on economic history, which are being jointly held. And I look forward a great deal to learn from this lecture. And I invite Dr. Suchendra to conduct this talk, and she will introduce the speaker as well as conduct the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ramanamurthy. Welcome to the University of Hyderabad, Professor Ranabir Chakravarti. It is with great pleasure I take this opportunity to introduce Professor Ranabir Chakravarti, whose seminal contributions to the study of early South Asian history at large and economic and social history in particular have influenced and informed generations of students of history. I chose to introduce him not through his laurels, which are many, but through his works. He has an enduring interest and engagements with the pre-modern maritime history of the Indian Ocean. His latest book, The Pull Towards the Coast and Other, is a collection of essays where we find that he talks about and identifies the factors of change and continuity with reference to particular cases and overviews. The introduction also is a sharp critical take on Eurocentrism in maritime studies and the nationalist takeover of Indian historiography in the recent past, where interactions across the Indian Ocean is viewed through the prism of civilizational superiority. His attempt, if I quote him in his own words, is to rescue the subcontinent's pre-modern pasts from the stranglehold of nationalism and the nation state. In this book also, he talks about, quote unquote, interactive history of the coast and the sea, the subcontinent and its adjacent maritime spaces, underscoring the tangible aspects as well as the cultural hybridity of the worlds that endure within the expanse of the Indian Ocean. His other recent book, which is a revised and enlarged version of his earlier collection of essays, Trade and Traders in Early Indian Society, is the product of his sustained interest in the history of trade, where merchants and markets plays a dominant role. Of late, he's arguing for the possibilities of the non-agrarian sector, especially trade, contributing to the process of state formation. So merchants come in a big way in his argument as one of the agencies of state formation. These two books, interestingly, were published in 2020 during the trying time of pandemic. His other major work, which has benefited students a lot, is Exploring Early India up to AD 1300. This book, which goes beyond the textbook, has seen many editions and has been translated to Hindi too. Chakravarti has also provided annotations to a 14th century Latin crusade tract, How to Defeat the Saracens. His other jointly edited, co-authored books include Warfare for Wealth. This was his first book, Early Indian Perspectives. Then a source book of Indian civilization, Trade in Early India, which had a very extensive introduction. Indo-Judaic Studies, A View from the Margin. And to this band, the latest is the jointly edited one with Abdul Momin Chaudhuri, the 2-volume production on the history of Bangladesh, published by the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh. And it has been recognized as a template of regional studies, which moves beyond fixed boundaries and talks about intersecting networks through time and space. Chakravarti also has to his credit a numerous number of essays, which were published in journals of repute and edited volumes, which is not possible to mention here, and I'm not going to name them like a catalog. But I must say that we are looking forward or awaiting his collection of essays on the Jewish Geniza records. And today, he's talking on one of those letters, and we look forward to listening to him on this very interesting theme. So, Professor Chakravarti, the floor is yours. You will have around 50 minutes to speak, and then we shall take questions and answers. Thank you very much for being with us today.
I'm deeply thankful to the very generous introduction given by my good old friend, Shuchandra. I would call her Professor Ghosh as the formality demands, but because we grew up together under our dear mentor, Professor B.N. Mukherjee. And it is a great pleasure for me to be participating in interactions with the renowned Department of History in the University of Hyderabad. And the initial efforts for organizing this lecture came from both Shuchandra and Dr. Varghese, to whom I am very grateful. And later, it was the head of the department, Professor Bangia, joined in the effort. And today, I'm really, really very honored, and in fact, also a little bit nervous in the presence of Professor Ramanamurthy, the Dean of the School of Economics. I love to do economic history, which is perhaps my most favorite area. But at the same time, I know very little of economics, and particularly my son does economics, so I know what it means. I'm really afraid of mathematics, so please do not expect from me what economists do in terms of economic history. And I have very little figure, in fact, to depend on. Mostly I'll talk about the qualitative data vis-a-vis the quantitative. And what is particularly very touching to me is that the Department of History in the University of Hyderabad, in close partnership with the Department of Economics here, has a lecture on economic history. And if we look at the recent trends, say for the last 2 decades, maybe even 25 years, the plethora of works on Indian history has taken a shift, and shift is, of course, the major facet of historiographical exercises. There is nothing wrong but the shift is now on cultural history, languages, and capturing society and culture through a linguistic turn or what is called the material culture. As a result of which, for reasons not always known to me correctly, the study of economic history is almost relegated to near invisibility. If we are interested in material culture, in how the material milieu and therefore the importance of economic life can be almost pushed to the margin. And often I hear that economic history reads like a very dreary, dry narrative of economic life. And therefore, perhaps students have gradually gone a little bit away and preferring more on social cultural history. I said, there is nothing wrong, but economic activities cannot be perhaps pushed to the footnotes, and entirely human society, human activities can perhaps not be merely summed up in terms of cultural performances or cultural activities. I know the broad understanding, the very broad package culture brings in, and economic activities may be brought under the rubric of culture, but it is economic history has an important ingredient in the understanding of social and cultural life. And in a complex society, which is like understanding of a complex culture, there are various, it's kind of an ensemble. And economic life does play a role, an important presence in that ensemble. So all this sort of encouraged me to get into a study of the 12th century, almost mid-12th century situation in the Indian Ocean history, of course, with a position from South Asian experiences. And I would like to present a particular analysis of a situation in 1138 of the Common Era. And my topic, as I have said, commodities in the shipowners and commodities in the correspondence of the Jewish India traders. And this is based on a specimen business letter of 1130. I have been recently reading the enchanting memoirs of Amartya Sen, Home in the World, in which he narrates, he reminiscences the situation just on the eve of his submission or at the final stage of his PhD dissertation. The PhD dissertation, as we all know, requires a proper title. And after some arguments with one of our supervisors, Joanna Robinson, and then in the presence of Maurice Dobb and Pierre Sraffa, the title was finalized. And particularly it was insisted upon, as Amartya Sen says, by himself. He argued for that particular title of the dissertation. When it was decided final, then Amartya Sen says that Pierre Sraffa commented, the title is suitably mysterious, perfect for a PhD dissertation. You can understand what I'm going to present. There is no mystery, and I am light years away from the almost superhuman abilities and span of intellectual activities of Amartya Sen. And luckily, I'm not presenting a defense of my PhD dissertation. So I am doing something very banal. So do please bear with me. I would like to point out that what I'm trying here, this is on the basis of the letters of the Jewish India traders. I'll use some explanations. These are letters written by merchants and many others, Jewish people, mostly belonging to North and Northwest Africa, with a very strong presence in Egypt, Misr or Masr, in the particularly with the coming of the very powerful ruling house, the Fatimid ruler, the Fatimid rule spanning from 909 to 969 to 1173. The green marks you can see, it's covering almost the whole of North Africa, and stretching from Morocco, Fez, Marrakesh to Sijil Masa, which is called at the very west Al Mahdia, and from there then into Egypt. You can easily see in the map Alexandria, Cairo, and then spreading into Syria, also Jordan, and almost touching the borders of Sudan. It's a very powerful caliphate. It's a Shiite caliphate, almost challenging the primacy of the Abbasid Caliphate at Baghdad. This is the political scenario, and there is a fairly substantial Jewish population in the Fatimid realm. About 30,000 Jewish people were there in the entire realm, with 7,000 is the number of population at Cairo, that is Al-Qahira. And this is a mosque in Al-Qahira, which now today is known as Cairo. The older part of the city was known as Al-Fushtat. In this, the synagogue at Ben Ezra, in the old part of the city called Fushtat, there was a Geniza, the Ben Ezra synagogue. In that, there is a Geniza. The term Geniza means something where it's a receptacle, it's a storage place. Actually, the Geniza is a windowless, a doorless, almost an abyss. It looks like that. You can see the staircase into which there is a rectangular aperture, and it's a room into which all the discarded papers including legal documents, disputes, business letters, partnership documents, marriage and divorce documents, would be thrown if their use is no longer required. These are garbage papers. And since the Jewish custom is that no paper could be destroyed if it carried the name of God, this was the mode of disposal of the useless, discarded paper. And in the Geniza, we find actually a vast storehouse. It's you can call it a vast waste paper basket. In that were found thousands of discarded paper. It was first, and you can see the earliest document to be deposited there ranges from 870 CE, almost for 1,000 years. The last document was 1880. In fact, it's a document coming from Mumbai, President Bombay, regarding a divorce paper. And luckily the divorce was averted, and that's why it was thrown into the Geniza. It was first noticed in the mid-18th century. Then the historical importance of the Cairo Geniza materials, deposited materials, began to come up by the very end of the about 1896, when a great scholar, Solomon Schechter of the Cambridge University, was able to find out some fragments of a letter written by the very well-known religious leader from the Jewish community, Moses Maimonides, to his brother David Maimonides in 12th century. On the eve of David Maimonides joining a sea voyage in the Indian Ocean. So here is the connection. And then there are many papers. Now the Geniza is completely empty. There is nothing there. But the documents have been strewn at various places in the world. The largest collection comes from the Cambridge University Library. And the greatest scholar of these letters is S.D. Goitein, who passed away in 1985, and his main place of work was Princeton University. And there are many great works by Goitein. The most famous has been the 6-volume mammoth work, A Mediterranean Society. The point is, in this study of the Mediterranean society, which Goitein is best known for, to begin with the study, he actually was devoting maximum of his attention to a bunch of 459 letters, which were written to the Jewish merchants, mostly from Cairo or other parts of Egypt, who were trying to reach out to the subcontinent, mainly Malabar area, occasionally to Gujarat and Konkan also, but mostly to the western seaboard of India, in the span between 1000 and late 13th century. And they are the persons who are sailing into the Indian Ocean through the Red Sea, from Egypt down to the through the Nile, from then the west coast of the Red Sea, from 2 major ports called Kush and Aidhab, from there to Aden, and then Aden is a very big hub. From Aden, then they're trying to reach the west coast of the subcontinent, mostly Malabar, to some extent Konkan, and the area of and Gujarat. Sorry. So, and this was to begin with the principal project of Goitein, which later he moved. As he said, I left the Indian Ocean and went for the Mediterranean. This was an interesting scenario. At this time, Fernand Braudel was into the project of his very famous 3-volume Civilization and Capitalism. And he was interested in Goitein's work and asked him repeatedly to join the venture, particularly the merchant story through the Geniza letters. And then Goitein categorically denied. And in sharp contrast to Braudel's centrality on economic history, Goitein wrote categorically to Braudel, I am a philologist and a historian of medieval Islam and Judaism, but will never write economic history. I regard it my duty to edit, to translate, to explain as exactly and as completely as possible this text of the Cairo Geniza. And he wished that the further works on this could be taken up by other people interested. The point is, in recent times, those 459 letters have come in the form of a bulky but very useful volume. It's called the Indian Ocean Documents. The Jewish traders called India Book. That was the original name. 459 letters, correspondence of the Jewish merchants, and they were described by, the term is India trader, not Indian trader. those whose destination was India or the Indian Ocean are called India traders by Goitein, particularly from the appellation used in the letters as Musafirun ul Hind. They were trying to reach India. And of course, the entire movement of these merchants, starting from the Red Sea lane and from Egypt through the Red Sea, then Aden or near about, then to the Indian seaboard. And in that, the role of Egypt is that of a hinge. It opens out both to the Mediterranean and also to the westernmost part of the Indian Ocean. So it is in this connection, we are actually listening to the voice of the merchants, the participants, including some of the Indic counterparts in the subcontinent. And this is a unique type of statement coming from the actual players who are involved in commercial activities. It is not the stories like the Jatakas, it is not the poetical exercises. Take, for example, in slightly later, the Maniprabalam literature. It is not like the Sangam poems or the stories in Kathasarit Sagara and the many other Jaina tales in which trade and traders would come, commodities would come, but only perhaps at marginal notices. These are not the stories of the kings. These are not the typical prashastis or eulogies. These are the correspondence of merchants. And the only parallel to this, not in the form of correspondence, but some voice of the merchants can be heard. Something like this comes from the Tamil merchants guilds or organizations in their inscriptions, particularly when these inscriptions are found from outside the subcontinent. The merchants do not speak of kings or the eulogies of kings. They talk about their own activities, often in the form of an eulogy. It is the merchant's voice that is the interesting scenario. And what we generally get in this correspondence, usually it begins with a very formal greetings from the sender, a Jewish merchant, to its recipient. Then the exchange of information regarding commerce, the different types of commodities, the demand and supply of commodities, their prices, whether the demand is fluctuating or a steady demand, some volatility of the market, and then, very important, the partnership, commenda among voyaging merchants to share the investment and the enormous risk in the long seaborne voyages. There are also documents on legal and commercial disputes. You can understand there could have been legal disputes which either could have been resolved, or later it could have been withdrawn. That's why all these papers, and even the commendar partnership, these are temporary partnerships. So after their use is over, they are thrown into the Geniza. The letters are written in a colloquial form of Arabic called Judeo-Arabic, though there are occasional Hebrew words. I am neither a specialist in Arabic or in Hebrew, and the translations made mostly by Goitein and his very prominent, one of the foremost scholars in this field, Mordecai A. Friedman. And the Goiteins, after Goitein's death, the collection came out in the name of both Goitein, S.D. Goitein, and M.A. Friedman. And what I'm trying to do occasionally, the statements in the letters can become more intelligible, and some things become more visible in conjunction with the Indic documentation as and where available. And that I'm trying to do. And around from 1000 AD onwards, the Indian Ocean, stretching from the west, say from Egypt, or say from Basra in the western, in the Persian Gulf, in the East African coast to the maritime Southeast Asia, and also even though beyond the Indian Ocean limits, even the South China Sea comes within the orbit of the Indian Ocean network, which depends entirely on the alterations of the monsoon wind system prior to the advent of the steam navigation. And then you have a number of ports coming on both the western and the eastern seaboards of the subcontinent, and the role of particularly Malabar here loom very large in the Jewish correspondence, which is called Mulebar, Munebar, Malibar, various terms obviously telling Malabar area. And as we know well from the copper plates issued by the Cheraman Perumal rulers of Malabar, and particularly now what is the Jewish synagogue in Cochin, the emblems of the Jewish network and the Jewish presence on the Malabar coast is already known. But the documentation from the Geniza records tell us certain very close-knit stories and cooperation of different types of marches. And as we know, the Malabar area is noted particularly for the formation of ports facilitated by the inlets and creeks and backwaters. And this is close to what is Kodungallur, where I made a little bit of field work about several years back, and the typical Keralan backwaters can be seen here. The recipient of the largest number of letters is a person called Abraham Ben Iju, a Tunisian Jew who came from Cairo via Aden to Malabar and lived for nearly 2 decades and close to Mangalore and other places from 1132 to 1149. He married a local Indian, possibly a Tulu woman named Ashu, who was originally her slave, but then manumitted, and bearing 3 children. Ben Iju ran a bronze factory in Al-Manjarur. We shall come across that. By around 1150, he returned to Al-Fustat or Old Cairo via Aden, and very prominently comes in the correspondence with Ben Iju is his close friend and business compatriot Madmun Ben Hassan Ben Japhet, a very prominent Jewish merchant and agent. In fact, he's the representative of the Jewish Malikul Tujjar at Aden. And we shall, today's particular correspondence will not directly be with Madmun, but a cousin of Madmun. We shall talk into the particular letter. This is written to Abraham by, we unfortunately haven't so far got any letter written by Abraham Ben Iju to other merchants, Jewish merchants. We only find that he's the large recipient of the largest number of the letters of the Jewish India traders. And this letter was written to Abraham Ben Iju by a person called Khalaf Ben Ishaq. He's a cousin and close business associate of Madmun Ben Hassan Japhet, who I've just mentioned, the Malikul Tujjar at the great port of Aden. It's a long letter, nearly 92 lines on both sides of the paper, touching on various business matters and commodities, ships and shipowners. There is I am emboldened a little bit to pick up this single letter because there are interesting lights thrown on maritime trade and society. But methodologically, I am a little bit encouraged by the recent wonderful work by Elizabeth Lambert called Abraham's Luggage, the life of things in the Indian Ocean history. She bases her analysis on a single Geniza document. The luggage list of Abraham ben Iju when he is returning with his daughter, leaving India via Aden. He is returning to his base in Egypt. A single document in conjunction with many other documents tells a fascinating story. And taking the cue from this wonderful work of Elizabeth Lambourne, I thought of highlighting a single letter, though occasionally we shall take into account a couple of other letters of the more or less same time. Now, the Cairo Geniza documents dealing with the maritime trade, it is the most important source for studying the shipowners, a very particular type of merchants, in fact, perhaps the wealthiest of merchants, because as you can understand, the investment pattern for this kind of ship owning is enormous. And only the richest of merchants could manage the financial aspect of investment and owning the ship along with their other subordinate staff in the ship by the shipowners. And fortunately for us, we get the names of some Indic shipowners also in the letters. Normally, we do not come across shipowners in the early Indian sources. The shipowners in the Geniza is usually termed as Nakhuda. Now is ship and Khuda the Lord. So Nakhuda, the ship owner, closely corresponding to the Sanskrit terms, the term coming essentially from the East Coast society, West Coastal area in the inscription and some text. Right from Gujarat to Goa, the term is quite prevalent, called no vittaka. No is ship, vitta is wealth. One whose wealth is derived from owning the ship is called no vittaka. And in epigraphic sources, the term Nakhuda and no vittaka have been used as synonymous terms, in fact, abbreviated also in Indic inscriptions. Now, that is no vittaka and Nakhu as the abbreviation of Nakhuda, obviously meaning that these vocabularies were so common that their abbreviations were available in epigraphic texts. The ship owner is differentiated usually from the ship captain, who is called Rubban, mostly in the passages of the oceanic travel. He was also called as Muallim or navigator, particularly in the famous navigational manual of Ibn Majid of the 15th century. There is no particular term to specify the ships. In Arabic, it is essentially markab, in plural marakib, and in Sanskrit, the very generic term, no. The ships, one of the two very major markers of unity or commonality across the vast space of the Indian Ocean is the presence of ubiquitous ships made of wooden planks which were stitched together with coconut cordage, which is called in the Geniza document as kinbar. Kinbar is the coconut cordage and figures repeatedly as an item shipped from India to the great port of Aidhab on the Red Sea. In fact, Aidhab is also the point from where a pious passenger intent upon the Hajj pilgrimage to go to Makkah would cross the Red Sea to the west from this port of Aidhab. Now, the wooden planks, which are essential ingredient for the construction of ships, say in the Persian Gulf area, also in the Red Sea area, in the Gulf of Aden area, is not locally available. The best quality timber came from the Indian subcontinent, particularly along the entire western seaboard. This is particularly borne out by the 14th century Latin Crusades tractate, De Modo Saracenos Extirpandi, about which Sri Chandra very kindly spoke about. And the other point of commonality is that the entire shipping business would go along with the shipping pattern, had to follow the alterations, the more or less predictable alterations of the southwest and the northeast monsoons. That usual term in the Jewish Geniza records is dakhal, which means to enter, particularly from the Red Sea water into the main body of the Western Indian Ocean, close to Aden or slightly to the north of Aden. As they entered there, the term would be, this is dakhal. And when they start their return journey past Aden, possibly to the Red Sea destinations, and in fact up to Egypt, the term is kharaj, which means homebound. That is the return. Obviously, a dakhal will be undertaken with the help of the southwest monsoon wind, and kharaj, the homebound, would be undertaken during the period of the northeast monsoon wind, the winter monsoon wind. As I say, the particular letter of 1138, written by Khalaf ben Ishaq to Abraham ben Ishu, following the usual format, mentions a number of ship owners. We start with the name Ibn Abul Qatai. His ship, he says that Ben Iju sent some consignment for Khalaf ben Ishaq at Aden, which was received by Khalaf ben Ishaq, and then it says the ship bringing 2.5 bahar of refurbished iron to Aden. A bahar is about 300 English pounds, about then 700 English pound, or about 350 kg of refurbished iron. I'll come back to iron a little bit later, which was duly received by Khalaf bin Ishaq. And here we find it says, I have received such and such item or commodity sent to by you in the ship of Ibn Abul Qatai. Then the letter also says that some items sent by Abraham bin Ishu from Dahabatan, which is Balarapattam, a port in Malabar, sent by Abraham bin Ishu to be collected by Khalaf bin Ishaq in the ship of Yusuf, which is Joseph bin Abraham bin Bandar, who was traveling from Dahabatan, Balarapatnam, and reaching Aden. But he actually is himself a Nakhuda. Yusuf or Joseph bin Abraham bin Bandar is himself a Nakhuda, and he is also a cousin of Khalaf bin Ishaq, which is typical of the Jewish custom. They're often operating in the close family circle or in a close, within the marriage relationship. Their business group formed in this. And then he was traveling in the ship of Ibn al-Muqaddam, and Muqaddam's father also was a shipowner. So we get here, Joseph himself was a shipowner, but normally we don't find the shipowners afloat. Here, Joseph Abraham bin Bandar was actually traveling from Balarapatnam to Aden in the ship of another shipowner, and that shipowner is a hereditary shipowner. And Joseph Abraham, so in just in 2 lines, we come across 1, 2, 3, 4 shipowners in a single line of the opening part of the letter. Then it says that there is it speaks of that at the end of the letter, Khalaf bin Ishaq is sending certain commodities to Abraham bin Ishu, listing them. I'll come back to that later. He's telling that I am sending certain commodities in the ship of Fadyar. The term is spelt in English transliteration as PDYR. It is pronounced as either Fadiar or Fadiar. The term is not a personal name. It's an office. It's a functionary's designation. It comes very close to what is known in the Canaries documents of 11th, 12th, 13th centuries as Padiyar. Essentially, a very close officer to the ruler, almost as the chief of the palace guard, and also holding other responsibilities within the royal court. The Padiyar is a very important figure in the coastal society and the coastal administration. But he is, because of his eminent position in the coastal society, the Padiyar has invested into shipping business. He is not called a Nakhuda, but his ships ply on the Aden and Malabar route. And that's why in his ship, some consignments were sent by Khalaq ben Ishaq. So this is the typical feature of the coastal society, that a high-ranking functionary in the royal court could invest into shipping business. And interestingly, the letter also mentions the Nakhuda in Fadiyar's ship. And this is the Nakhuda here does not mean here a ship owner, but in this context, the ship captain. He is not mentioned in Rabban or a Muallim, but called a Nakhuda. His name has been read either as Ahmad or Muhammad. Very interestingly, this is a Muslim ship captain, and immediately speaks of the close cooperation between the Jewish merchants, the Indic merchant, and the Muslim merchant. In fact, the Geniza has several papers on legal disputes and also partnership, some problems which were settled or taken to the court, but there is hardly any indication in the letters of the in the Indian Ocean Jewish merchants of any religious animosities with the Islamic group or different Indic merchants. And this is a fascinating message comes, the accommodation of diversity, interfaith, diversities, interfaith cooperation. There may be some competition and rivalries, but at least the Geniza does not betray any religious animosities in these three groups. And we have to keep in mind, whether in Egypt or in Aden or in the port of Aidha, it is the Jewish population is definitely under the rule of the crescent. In the same letter, we also come across the mention of two ships, one large, one small, owned by a person mentioned as Fatan Swami. The Fatan Swami or Fatan Sami, once again, like Padiyar, it is not a personal name, it's not a proper name, but it's an administration designation. It is the Arabic form of the Indic word called Pattana Swami. Pattana is a port, Swami is the lord or a high-ranking functionary, and this officer, Pattana Swami, is quite frequent in the inscriptions of the Silaharas of Konkan, the rulers of Goa, particularly the Kadamba records, also in the Canaries coastal area have inscriptions where Pattana Swami figures. He is an important port officer, but also invests typically in shipping business. And as the letter from Aden by Khalaf ben Ishaq shows, that the Fatan Sami's ships started from Fandarai. This is the port of Pantala Kollam, close in the northern part of Malabar, close to present-day Calicut, and it was sailing to Aden. Unfortunately, the larger ship of Fatan Sami floundered near there's a shipwreck near Bab el Mandab, almost the funnel-like straight, and which is a tricky part to sail, and the ship wrecked there. As a result of which the cargo naturally went down with the ship. And the letter says professional divers from Aden port were brought to salvage the commodities from the sunken ship. And some commodities could have been retrieved, and how much money was spent and how it will be settled in the accounts of Ben Ezra and also Madmun has already been indicated by the letter from Khalaf bin Ishaq. So the professional divers have been kept at the port of Aden, and in case of a shipwreck, as much as possible, salvaging operations were undertaken. Obviously, these divers were sort of in a wretched condition and probably what may be called the subalterns of the Indian Ocean maritime scenario. And these kind of ships probably sailed. You can easily see these are both from the Al-Hariri ship. The manuscript was prepared in 13th century, and it typically shows a ship made of wooden planks, and you can see a quarter rudder at the end. There is also a grapnel anchor, iron anchor. There are several crews which are given a very dark complexion in the painting, possibly indicating they are coming from the African coastal area. And you can also see two persons bailing out water from the hold of the ship, but 6 passengers are peeping from the windows in the upper part of the ship, but there is an open deck. And similarly, the smaller figure, you can see someone is boarding the ship, probably Abu Zaid. This is the memory of Abu Zaid. And once again, the figures of passengers and the bailers at the very hold of the ship can be seen. So these are the typical ships and about which the letters are illustrated. Now, the commodities. In the letters and in many other places, the most important commodity shipped from Malabar to Aden and then on to Egypt is black pepper, which, as Ramila Thapar pointed out, in the time of the Roman trade with India, the black gold. The demand from the 1st century BCE to about 18th century remains around the black pepper, the black gold, and it was taken to Egypt from Egypt across the Mediterranean to Italy and other parts of Europe. Due to the shipwreck in the larger ship of Fatanswan, there was a large consignment of pepper, and the total cargo of black pepper was lost. And in a single, for a single Jewish merchant, in a single ship, at least 350 kgs of paper were there, and which was completely lost. There are many other references to paper from different letters. I'm not getting into details. Paper is, after all, a plant product. An aromat, it's a plant product, obviously procured in bulk. It is perhaps not a luxury commodity in the place of its origin. It's a plant product, but when it is shipped out and reaches markets far away, it turns into a luxury commodity. And as an agrarian bulk product, it is transformed into a highly coveted and very expensive aromat. And this we can find out in the study, through a comparative study of the Geniza papers, and also a major account of the Rasulid documents, also the accounts of Ibn al-Mujawir, who died in 1291, in his fascinating account of the port of Aden. And this was worked in a masterly manner by Roxani Eleni Margariti in her history of Aden as a great port. Around 12th century, Aden, the price of paper in Aden range from about 25 to 50 dinars. This is Maliki dinar, that is the local gold coin of Aden, distinct from the Egyptian mythical or the Egyptian gold coins. So 25 to 50 dinars, that is the price range in the 12th century. In a century later, late 13th, early 14th century, the paper price increased to 75 dinars. And this is, as I said, the Margaritian Sargent's calculation give us this kind of growing, increasing price of Indic paper through Aden, then of course going farther north into the Red Sea zone. And then we found also the same letter speaks of regular shipment of Indic iron to Aden. In fact, the refurbished iron figures very clearly, which is called Mudat, nearly 350 kgs, was received by Khalaf bin Isaac from Bandar. We have already mentioned that. This is called the refurbished. I do not know what exactly would be the qualitative difference. There are other 5 varieties of iron in different Geniza documents. Some is called Baid, egg-shaped ingots, small pieces. You can, I would just, the term Baid or Baida means egg. And if someone goes to the famous Bademia shop behind the Taj Mahal Hotel in Kolaba area, there is a famous Baida roti. So Baid is egg, but obviously when applied to the case of iron, it means egg-shaped ingots. There is a regular or standard type of iron, Rasni. Then there's a shiny iron called Raksh, and smooth, Amlash. And there is another variety called Kufi. Obviously, there is considerable iron smelting and mining in and around, say, Karnataka and maybe even northern part of Kerala, and particularly in the Karnataka area, which is rich in iron ore, and also we do not know if it could have come from even Tamil Nadu, like somewhere like the Kudremukh iron ore project was well known, but regular iron, various types of iron as raw, unfinished iron were regularly shipped from Indic ports to Aden. And interestingly, this is a bulk commodity, like bulk commodity of paper. And obviously, this is not a luxury item. This is meant for daily necessity purposes. And then, very interestingly, we also come across the shipment of falfal, that is betel nuts, which is in Arabic falfal, is coming from the Sanskrit word for betel nuts, pugafala, fofala, falfal or fofal. And we have, in fact, a shipowning merchant, very rich, called Fofali, which indicates that the bulk item, once again, agrarian product. It's a crop, actually, it's a plant product. Betel nuts obviously were cultivated in huge bulk and also shipped in as a bulk item, but it could yield enormous resources and profit to a merchant who could turn himself into a ship owner. His name is Ali Ben Mansur Fawfali. He no longer deals in any betel nut trade. Probably he comes from the family of betel nut dealers, but has become enormously rich to invest in shipping. And he figures not in this Geniza letter, but in several other Geniza letters. Then it says that the betel nuts were sent by Abraham ben Ish through a person called Johar, who is a slave agent, Gulam, of a merchant called Dafir, but it has not yet reached Khalaf bin Ishaq. That was reported in the letter. And the name Johar is a typical Persian name. And obviously Dafir is an Arabic name and is a Muslim merchant. Then there is also the mention of a merchant whose name speaks of the commodity he deals in. His name is Ahmad bin Nili obviously is dealing in meal or indigo, once again an agrarian product. And the next item, as Khalaf bin Ishaq requests Abraham bin Ish to procure for him cardamom at whatever price it has in Malabar, and to send it on the ship, which is on the return trip from Malabar to Aden. That will go as a return cargo. So particularly what we see here, iron is a raw material sent in bulk, not a precious commodity. Similarly, betel nut, meal, indigo, and cardamom all are agrarian products which have a regular shipping character, obviously produced in considerable bulk and therefore meant for shipping out beyond the subcontinent. I'll come back to this expression that Khalaf requested Abraham ben Ishu to procure cardamom. He said, I'm giving you no instruction. You are expert in the local situation. You know what to do best. I am not even thinking of the price. Just procure and send it to Aden because it has a demand in Aden. Interestingly, then Khalaf says almost in the second half of the letter, that in the ship that sails from Aden to Malabar, he's sending some silk, 5 months. Silk was sent by Khalaf bin Ishaq through an agent called Abu Ali Taib for Abraham bin Iju. He says, instead of sending gold, we do not know whether gold means gold coins for purchase or for further use as a bullion, or gold was sent as a bullion. But it seems to have been a regular practice to send precious metal, gold or silver, whether as currency or bullion from Aden. And therefore, we know that India was known as the sink pit of precious metal, particularly gold and silver, particularly in the coastal areas, and one such case not in Malabar, but this is the brooch hoard of 14th century, which has a large number of Egyptian and Adani gold coins. But he says that I'm sending silk, which is reported to have been selling in Malabar well. And so that Khalaf hopes that by selling the silk, he might get some profit. And within quote, he says, thus kindly sell it for me, your servant, meaning himself, for whatever price God, the exalted, apportions as livelihood. This is the very polite way of requesting business friends to do some business on their behalf in a far-off land. This is, interestingly, as I said, the merchants' cooperation and seeking the business intelligence, how one would cooperate. And in this way, this is nothing uncommon. Another merchant a Jewish merchant from Aden, once made a similar request to Abraham bin Iju to purchase on his behalf certain commodities from Malabar, which would sell well in Aden. And he said that I'm not going to give you any details. And this is my very favorite quote. Why he depends on Abraham bin Iju from Aden. The quote is, one who is present can see what is not seen by one who is absent. That is almost the guiding spirit of the letters being exchanged and the correspondence. One who is present can see what is not seen by one who is absent. There are, apart from these commodities, there are certain other items or goods, often of the nature of household goods. Khalaf says in the opening of his letter to Abraham Iju that he had sent 14.5 pounds of copper, a broken ewer, and a broken stool, all made of copper. And then he requests that with this 14.5 pounds of copper and the broken ewer and the broken stool, he requests that these are to be used for remanufacturing some new items, that a new basin and a new ewer, possibly for holding water, also to be used as a table lamp, also as a flower vase, small stand for a candle. And if there is some copper is saved, a Caliph requests that Abraham ben Ishu may sell it to the market, and whatever price it fetches can be settled in his accounts. Interestingly, once again, here the request is for not precious metal items, but copper, a base metal. And the indication is Abraham ben Iju, who ran a bronze factory at Mangalore. Possibly at his factory, all these raw materials are to be sent for manufacturing or remanufacturing of some of the household goods. This touches upon the quotidian life of the Jewish merchants, about what they required in the household and not always meant for very precious items. And on the other hand, Abraham ben Ishu must have requested in some other correspondence, which you do not know, to Khalak ben Ishaq to send him and order him to send him some items from Aden itself. And so Khalaf ben Ishaq does so, with keeping in mind the request from Abraham ben Ishu from Malabar, and sends an iron frying pan. The letter says that Abraham ben Ishu preferred a stone frying pan with a cover, but the stone frying, the cover, the lid broke, so it became useless. And Khalaf ben Ishaq therefore sent an iron frying pan, and telling that it is better than, obviously meaning it will be more durable and easier to handle than a stone frying pan, but also sends varieties of glassware, tumblers. There are 10 bowls, cups, jugs, kept in a neat basket, packed with the name Abraham ben Iju written on that, and says that the small pots also were ordered, and he said that he could not buy it individually. Obviously, a small number was required by Abraham bin Iju, and Khalaf informs that these are not individually sold in the market of Aden. These are available in dust, which immediately means that bulk. Even in Bengal, we call, if we go on for a big sheaf of papers, we call it dasta. Ek dasta paper, 10 dasta paper, for writing paper or for making exercise book, dasta, dista. So it's a bulk. So it is purchased in a large number because it is not available in individual pots. And the price of it is also there. So the account will be settled at the end of the year. And at the very end of it, there is some gifts, which is a typical feature of courtesy, of friendship, of saying polite words in the beginning, at the end, and with some gifts. In the very last section of the letter, a bottle of sugar, good Abyssinian hide, obviously indicative of the connections between the area of Abyssinia in the west coast, the African west coast of the Red Sea, and also wheat. And this is an interesting point. Wheat will be required by an observant Jew like Abraham ben Iju in his household, not only for taking bread, but also making flour. And bread, as we know, is not only a part of the dietary everyday culture, it is part of the Jewish ritual of breaking the bread with wine. And so, and wheat in Malabar will not be easily available. Had it been, say, in northern Indian scenario, in Haryana, Rajasthan, Gujarat, it would have been easily available locally. But in Malabar, it is not so easily available. And we find, if I may digress a little bit, in the wonderful work done by Elizabeth Lambourne, as I mentioned before, the luggage list of Abraham Ben Iju, what we often call the personal effects, that shows several gunny bags were taken by Abraham Ben Iju during his return journey, sailing out from Malabar to Aden, then to Egypt, having lots of wheat and also flour, because it's a long journey. Nearly 2 to 3 months will take from Malabar to Aden, and then into the Red Sea, another couple of months. So to last that particular journey, you need victuals, and therefore, even for the observation of religious rituals, and after all, the Tunisian Jew will be much more conversant to taking wheat-based bread rather than the typical Indic dietary culture of rice. But interestingly, in that luggage list were also several gunny bags containing rice. And therefore, Abraham and Elizabeth Lambourne very rightly pointed out that the long diasporic presence of Abraham Ben Iju for nearly 20 years familiarized him also with the local dietary custom culture, and he obviously became accustomed to taking rice, and that's why in the return journey, in his luggage list figures not only wheat and flour but also rice. Now, this is something we have been discussing. It's a peculiar word. The interesting point from purely commodity point of view is the importance of bulk commodities, and the Geniza papers, particularly this one, is a classic indicator that long distance trade should not be viewed merely in the form of the cargoes of luxury, small quantity, portable luxury items. Yes, they would fetch enormous profits. But who are the consumers of this very high price commodities? Obviously, only the upper strata of the society, whether in Aden or in Egypt. On the other hand, the bulk commodities, though obviously at obviously much lesser priced and would perhaps bring lesser profit than the handling of expensive commodities, but has a wider, much wider social consumption, cutting across different layers of the consumer society, and therefore it will balance out the profit potential of the handlers. And that would be the attractions of the merchants, even dealing with this relatively inexpensive items. We do not know what the use of so many varieties of iron would have been meant for. At least apart from household goods, some of the irons could have been used for weapon making, as a Damascene swords, and for which the Indic iron has been mentioned, particularly for their excellent quality. Perhaps the most important feature in terms of the social aspect of this trade is the sense of plurality. The interactions between the Islamic merchants, the Jewish merchants, and varied types of Indic merchants. Among the Indic merchants, apart from the various agents, including Abraham Iju's Indic Ghulam, slave merchant, slave agent, is Bama, on whom Amitav Ghosh's wonderful book, In an Antique Land, also one of his research papers in the subaltern studies, indicated the term Bama is possibly a typical Tulu name like a Bommai. And Bama is not merely a slave agent, Ghulam, but he keeps important information of Beniju's trading activities, also takes decisions. Sometimes he is sailing abroad. There are business letters coming from Madmun speaking of Bama in Aden. Sometimes Bama has reached Egypt also, obviously for furthering the business interests of his master Abraham bin Iju. And in some cases, Bama is reported of a very haughty behavior. After a drink or two, in an inebriated manner, he reached the office of Madmun ben Jafet in Madmun Hassan in Aden, and Madmun reports against that. But he is also called in 2 letters, a slave agent called Ghulam, addressed as Brother Bama, addressed once as Sheikh Bama. So, though he's a Ghulam, his importance in the trade network brings him the honorific of Sheikh, and also he's endeared as a brother. So there are many other letters I picked up, particularly for showing the details. This is particularly long letter showing the world of the shipowners, and the presence of Indic shipowners is a revelation. Normally we come across a few Mahanavikas, as Shuchandra has done in recent times. In the Mahanavikas were found in an Andhra port of mid-9th century. We know Mahanavikas from Bengal, but the actual shipowners in the form of Nakhudas, Novittakas, they figure maximum in the Jewish Geniza business letters. It very clearly shows that Indic merchants did take to the sea, and the typical fear of the Kalapani, which is projected repeatedly in terms of the normative Sanskrit treatises, was not at all effective, particularly those who were drawn to the sea for their livelihood, also for their sustenance. So this is the world, and particularly the voice of the merchants, the participants, their success, their failures. We know of a particular merchant's letter who was, I'll just before I finish, I shall also point out, not everything was very smooth, not everything went as planned. A Jewish merchant from Egypt had been, was staying in India for over more than 2 years. He was not successful, and naturally, he could not go home empty-handed, unsuccessful. The more he waited, there were obviously strain in his family life back in Cairo, and possibly the wife was threatening a divorce. The man wrote a moving piece to his wife, repeatedly requesting her not to contemplate a divorce, and tells that he's longing for his wife, and says that, like his wife, he too is completely burdened by loneliness. To get rid of that, he occasionally took to drinking, but says that I behaved myself impeccably, indicating he never visited a courtesan's house, and repeatedly tells that, please wait for a few more days. I cannot go back empty-handed. Let us wait for a few days and avert this divorce. And he says that some people back home may have been instigating you to get into this divorce, but once you have done this, the annulment of marriage will take us apart. Please don't do that. Wait and contemplate. The interesting point is that letter from the merchant in India was found in Geniza, meaning that that became a discarded letter. Perhaps the divorce was averted. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, please.
We have just had a fascinating, majestic analysis of a particular letter. Thank you very much, Ranabir, for this. And he showed actually when he looks at this documents in conjunction with the Indic documents. So this gives a different kind of perspective to all the understanding of the letters. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and I would request here the participants here to put their questions in the chat box, perhaps. Or would, if you want to, I don't know, Verghese, can they ask questions directly? What is the option?
Yes, they can. They can raise their hands and they can directly ask the questions as
So
well.
you can please directly ask. I think that is the better than reading the chat box.
Professor Ranabir, can you
Yes,
close
please.
your slide? So
Yeah, I what I have to do, I've just
yeah, you just close. Yes. Close
yes,
it.
and then
We'll make it
Is
a full screen. Yeah.
is it okay now?
Yeah, it is okay.
Yeah,
now.
it's better. Yeah.
Okay.
We can actually please stop presenting. So then we don't see the slides anymore.
Yeah. I've removed the slide.
Okay. Professor Bhangia, do you have anything to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, please initiate.
Yeah, I think. Professor Ranabir, I mean, so thank you so much for the very detailed account of this 12th century trade activities in the Western coast. I'm just wondering, there was intense trade activities during this period particularly. And I mean, as you are suggesting at the end, Arabic traders were not making profits from this trade. So if you stretch it little, down, to 16th, 17th century. Can we say, according to you, what are the hurdles or things which push the Arabic traders back, and in a way, what was that help the European companies to make a dent in the Indian Ocean or trade with India? Means what is the success mantra of the European, to put it short? Okay, and how the Arabic trade network was pushed back?
The point is, particularly from 1500 onwards, with the coming of the Portuguese in the form of the Estado da India, then the arrival of the European joint stock companies from the North Atlantic zone, starting with the Dutch, the French, the English, and the French East India companies. Now, the organization from 1500 onwards is completely different. First of all, the Portuguese attempt into the Indian Ocean scenario, followed by the three other European joint stock companies, are in the form of, the prime point is establishing monopolies. Now, this was not the scenario with any player in the Indian Ocean history. Say, the Arabs were not telling this is our monopoly. Even when from 1404 to 1433, the famous voyages of Zheng He under the Ming, Ming voyages were state initiated, but neither did it lead to establishing, it did not seek a monopoly of the Ming dynastic power to trade in the vast areas of Indian Ocean. We have to take note of the fact that 60 years before Vasco da Gama's fleet reached Calicut, The Ming fleet had already visited Malindi. They had gone up to Aden. They had reached Hormuz. They touched Calicut 8 times, Chittagong 4 times. They did reach Sri Lanka and, of course, maritime Southeast Asia. But here, the moment the Portuguese, the very purpose of Portuguese presence by circumnavigating the Cape of Good Hope is to seek the monopoly trade in spices, thereby removing the competition from the Arab groups. And by Arab, it's a very broad homogenization. There were various Arabic speaking merchants, say from the Red Sea area, from Aden, Arabic speaking merchants, from Hormuz area, from the Hadrami coast, from East African coast. And the Arabic language was also spreading to, by about the 13th century, 14th century, it was definitely reaching even up to Southeast Asia. That's why you have a sultanate in Malacca. So this is a major, and in that, what is called the armed trade, how far they were successful or not, how the Indian Ocean trading structure was accommodated in the European ventures is a different story. But nowadays, the tendency is to undermine in the recent historiography that yes, Indian Ocean was also a zone of violence. How much was armed trade regularly carried on? Take, for example, the chartered joint stock companies. They were representing almost the state power sanctioned by the respective parliaments of these countries, both for the English East India Company and the Dutch VOC. And that's why a major, apart from the money available, the enormous amount of capital investment, the mercantilist push from European scenario, the better structuring of the ships, and of course the firepower. That's why Ashim Dasgupta, my mentor in the Indian Ocean studies, and in fact, I was introduced to the study of Goitein and the Geniza by none other than Ashim Dasgupta. And that's why a little photograph stands above my head behind. Ashinda pointed in his own inimitable way that the Europeans were not a significant figure in the Indian Ocean arena till the Europeans started beating the natives. I think that sums up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Apart from the business techniques and also the better shipping pattern, with the coming of the industrial age, the industrial revolution, then the entire pattern changed.
Yes, Professor Murthy.
Yeah, please.
To flag the same point.
Yes, Professor Murthy.
Oh, sorry. Am I audible?
Yeah, please.
Just flagging the same thing about the shipping. Once I happened to hear a Portuguese historian's narration about how in the 14th century or even by 12th century, the European ships design changed actually because they were actually designed to face the Atlantic Ocean, the strong storms of Atlantic Ocean, which other parts did not have. For example, Indian Ocean was much more peaceful, and so they had this big mast and with a deep hull, and which actually became useful to mount a gun on it.
Exactly.
And all the Indian or Chinese ships were smaller ones, and were actually doing their job fine because they were, as far as trading is concerned, they were suited very well. And so the big ships, discovery of the big ships with a heavy mast, and that enabled the armed trade. Probably a little later, like maybe Vasco da Gama and later, but we are talking about even much before, maybe for BC, from the Roman times, from the Greek times, to maybe the arrival of the Europeans later. What is interesting is that Indians also owning the shipping. That's a very interesting thing. That because later on, historians say that when the Europeans, in the later part of time, the modern trade took over, modern ships arrived, etc., where the Europeans had the monopoly. Once the Industrial Revolution took place, the shipping became their monopoly. And Indian shipbuilding industry totally got wiped up. And in a major way, shipping returns went only, they were not shared between the Indians and the Europeans, which used to be earlier the case, where Indian ships also, Indian shipping industry also thrived even until probably 1850, until the European Revolution took place. There was a strong Indian shipping industry, and both in Calcutta and Bombay and several places. And in the Surat, considerable amount of shipping industry took place. And only when the modern iron ships came and with the steam engines, I think that's when I think Indian ship industries was totally left behind, and thereby the trade became much more in favor of the Europeans, where not only the trading gains but also the associated returns in the banking and shipping areas went to Europe. I'm sorry if I said too much.
No, you are absolutely right. I'll just say a couple of points. Take, for example, even in around 1740s, 1750s, past 1750 at Surat, the Bandar-e-Mubarak of the Mughals, the greatest port of Gujarat, there the stellar role of the shipowner Mullah Abdul Ghaffur, who is immortalized in Ashin Das Gupta's writing, The Decline of Surat and Indian Merchants. There you will find Mullah Abdullah Ghaffur, the largest ship owner. Even with him, the Dutch East India Company and the English East India Company could not compete. He owned 32 ships, the largest fleet, the mercantile marine. And from there, after the well-established, well-entrenched role of the European joint stock compacts, first of all, the enormous capital investments that went into the making of these compacts, their inbuilt political program and the ability to wage war. The other point is the technological innovations from the European situation. If you look at the older images of even late 18th, early 19th century, say of Chennai, or of say Kochi, or Kollam, or Surat, none of these had any regular harbor structure that you nowadays find in, say, Goa, in Marmagao, in Mumbai, in Chennai, in Visakhapatnam. This is the European engineering skill and engineering technique, that harbor structures could be built up, and actually then it is exactly the sea-facing harbors could come up. Earlier, neither Surat nor Masulipattnam nor Nagapattinam is actually on the sea. They are estuarine or deltaic ports, slightly sheltered inside. And therefore, most of the times the European ships also, there are fascinating images that the main big ships are in the roadstead, while the smaller dinghy-like boats, smaller boats are carrying passengers and commodities close to the shore, and what is called beaching. People are jumping into shallow water and then walking across. That is a very major, and therefore came the warehousing facilities. And a very important point, the control over the hinterland. Till perhaps even in the early 18th century, the European presence are essentially into the coastal pockets, sometimes Pulicat, sometimes Chichura, sometimes Chittagong, sometimes Diu, sometimes Goa. But as the process of the control over the interior, the hinterland, they already had the control over the sea patches to the foreland. The control over the hinterland then became an irrepressible force, and therefore, ultimately, whatever remained of the indigenous shipping network was essentially towards the coastal shipping, or at the most, say from Malabar towards Maldives, or say from Gujarat, then sailing out towards Muscat, or say the area of the Gulf. That definitely went to making, there are many other factors, but these are the broad images of change.
There is a question from our colleague, Dr. Anindita Mukhopadhyay. I'm reading it out. It's in the chat box. And after Anindita, Varghese, you will ask you. We'll have question from Dr. Varghese also.
Yeah.
So thank you for a wonderful presentation. Did the tight mercantile communities prevent this seafaring knowledge being transferred to other social groups? Professor Murthy's question mentions Indian within quotes shipping, but this category does not apply to the 14th century, does it?
No, first of all, the actual shipping technology, the navigational technologies that would enable the ship to sail, the manning of the ship, they would come, these would be provided by, if I use the Sanskrit terms, it's called the no jana navika karmakar. Karmakar means actually servant. Though these are the servant-like people, the crew, navika is a sailor, mariner, but his figure is that of a karmakara vis-a-vis the merchant, the novitya. So his position is not only marginal, subordinated, obviously a poorer section of the society and in caste structure. Similarly, what is called al-askar, from which the word laskar has come into Bengali and other North Indian languages, al-askar is the typical crew, the kind of the bailers, those who would be the didwan or sitting at the top of the deck and looking for some of the isharat, that is the signs of change in the water, in the aquatic animals or other features in the land formation, etc. These are the workforce. And even the muallim, the navigator, the captain, the sailors, they are often people of the oral world. There is hardly any manual written or they possessed by that. They are highly skilled people, but the knowledge is passed on generation to generation by oral method. And therefore, there is no such written manual, which is an advantage with the European nations. Take, for example, the contrast. In the case of Ahmad ibn Majid, the greatest navigator before the time of the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean, he is a literate muallim who obviously reduced to writing the floating traditions of sailing, technology of sailing, understanding of the monsoon wind system, which is the safest time to cross which part of the sea. These are only in the written manual of Ibn Majid has been reduced in the form of a manual or a text. These are oral floating traditions, like the Gujarati pothis, which were of the 18th century, some what is called malum pothis, the muallim pothi of the muallims. These were discovered by a few of them by Professor B. Arunachalam of the Bombay University, a great pioneer in the understanding of traditional navigation techniques. But normally, these do not belong to the people who belonged to the upper echelons of the society. They remain at the margin. Even when there is enormous profit for the merchants, they remain at the margin. While in the case of the Europeans, take for example the case of Jan Huygen Linschoten, a Dutch person who happened to be in the employment of the of the Archbishop at Goa. He was in his service for a pretty long time in the later half of the 16th century. Then the Archbishop died. He went back to Holland. Along with him carried all surreptitiously copied sea charts, the details of strategic positions, the sea currents, the weather report, everything, took them into Holland. And then what happened? The combination of publisher, of an investor, an explorer and the map maker, all combined to form what is called the Itinerario of 1596 by Linschoten. And in another 4 years, the Dutch East India Company is formed. Similarly, the person called Hendrik Bauer, another Dutch sea captain, he was explored a peculiar way of reaching to Southeast Asia, particularly Batavia, not by circumnavigating the Cape of Good Hope, but he sailed down for the unexplored southern part of Indian Ocean, almost reached the northwest coast of Australia, which became known as New Holland, and from there turned further east, and then straight up into the Indian Ocean, reached Java. By that, he obviated the challenge of the Portuguese, and at the same time discovered and therefore undermined the immense hold of the monsoon wind system. In anything beyond the 10-degree latitude, monsoon does not operate. This is a different wind system called the Roaring Forties. The interesting point is not only this was discovered, Hendrik Bauer became the governor of the Dutch East Indies at Batavia for at least 6 years in the early part of 17th century. That is impossible in the Indic circumstances. A sailor and a ship captain remains that. A muallim does not come up into the social ladder or in the political ladder.
Yeah, we'll take 2 more questions, one from Verghese and one is there in the chat box by Malini, and there's a comment by Vijay. I'll read out that comment. So Verghese, and then I'll read out Malini's question.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ranabir.
By 6, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent presentation, Professor Ranabir, and also for giving us a sense about the 12th century trade in the Indian Ocean by looking at this letter to Abraham Ben Iju. Luckily, Abraham Ben Iju is familiar to us thanks to Elizabeth Lampone's work. Not only his legages is also familiar, right?
Exactly.
So I'm also particularly struck by this gift of wheat, which was being transferred from across the ocean. Perhaps we were more connected to distant land through ocean than through the land route, and wheat is an important sign of that. Now, I have one observation when you were speaking about the ship owners. The word that denotes ship owners is Fatana Sami, you said in the letters, right? And then you have connected that with Pattanam and Fort, right? But then it struck to me quickly there that the ship in Malayalam, the pre-modern ship in Malayalam, even today, is known as Pattemari. It's Pattemari. It's basically that ship with that long mast, which basically allow the ship to move along the ship. So I don't know if there is a etymological connection there. Now, my question is, you are speaking about the partnerships, the merchant partnerships and the network. And you also mentioned that there is no enmity along the religious lines during that time among them. So I'm just wondering, what is the main markers of this commercial network? Was it organized primarily along faith and religion? So Sebastian Prange's work is also in my mind when I ask this, because it is Mansum Islam. So was it primarily religious identity that defines this network, or there much more a kind of a shared identity marker which developed into some sort of merchants network by any chance? Right? That's my question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Varghese. First of all, I would say that I'm not sure about, I do not know Malayalam, but the term Pattanam Pattinam, particularly in Dravidian language, would mean a coastal site, particularly a port. That's why you have called Visakhapattinam, the antiquity of which goes back to mid-11th century. And you have Nagapattinam, which continues not only in the famous in the Cholo times, but also later times, right up to the Dutch records from Negapatam is there. And so Pattanam Pattinam, and that term Swami would mean perhaps the person, an official, is an official who is in charge of, or he looks after the Pattanam or the port. And even the famous Pattanam excavation close perhaps to Muziris obviously means it's a port. And this, the important point, this is feature of the coastal society, that someone, a high official in entrusted with port administration, would like to invest into shipping business. And this is not something unique in the Geniza letters. We have inscriptions of the early medieval times from entire Konkan area, where we find generations, at least 3 generations of shipowners. And there are at least one person is called a Mahamatya, a very senior high-ranking Amatya. There is also one is called a kind of a organizer of fleet, no Vitak. So, and his generations are engaged in running mercantile marine because they are exempted from paying of custom duties at the particular port, obviously by family connections. So Pattanaswamy, I do not know how would it be connected to fleet, but this person obviously is a ship owner along with his administrative eminent position. And otherwise, the authority here, this is typical of the coastal society. I don't find, say, someone, a very high-ranking officer in an interior, say the Rashtrakuta kingdom or the Pala kingdom or the Gurjara Pratyahara kingdom, would suddenly invest into shipping business. This is a typical feature of the maritime coastal world of the South Asian scenario. The other point you raise is to what extent the religious factor led to some kind of denominational character. In terms of the South Asian scenario, we have to keep in mind that, as Prange did indicate well, the various Muslim merchants, whether coming from the Central Islamic land or say from East African coastal area, would be, by religious belief, they would be, they are followers of Islam, but they are known as coming from different places, known not really as Muslim merchants, as we often try to homogenize. They have their faith, of course, and that's why we find in Kerala, as Prange's work did, how the Rasulid sultans arranged for regular stipends to the imam of the mosques in coastal Kerala. That's why it is Islam, but monsoon Islam also connected with the monsoon sailing. Similarly, they were after a diasporic group in the overall non-Islamic cultural scenario in the mainland of South Asia. Similarly, the Jews, they are not only the smallest diasporic minority group in India, but also the Jewish diaspora spread all over the globe, the Indic diaspora is the smallest. So this is a peculiar scenario. So in that case, they might try to retain their individual group-wise identity in the coastal pocket. Obviously, that the host society would accommodate this kind of divergent practices of faith. How much? This is certainly speaking of the plurality. How much they were accommodated but with differentiated, I cannot point out because I have no clue that. I won't be surprised if the host society in pre-modern Indian scenario would consider the Jewish and the Islamic groups, particularly those who are coming across the sea, as what is called in Kerala as Pardeshi Jews, as outsiders, accommodated in the society, but also differentiated. I'm not telling segregated, but differentiated. And that's why I would not use the word tolerance here. I would say accommodation of plurality, promotion of plurality, interfaith coexistence is there. But how much it was a very congenial situation, I do not know. Take, for example, I can give you one example from the case of Somnath, where in 1264, a Hormuzi Nakhuda, and that time Gujarat is not ruled by Sultanate, but the Solanki rulers, was given a grant, a piece of land to build a mosque, which is called in Sanskrit Mijigiti. And there is no differentiation, no religious animosity about the erection and patronage to an Islamic shrine. But the inscription in Sanskrit categorically says that the piece of land was given Somnath Deva Nagara Bajye at the outskirts of the city limits of Somnath. By that, I do not mean that it was cut off. The provisions of the grant and the layout of the maritime city of Somnath, I call it a maritime city, shows that the land for the Islamic shrine was well connected with other parts of the city. But nevertheless, the land was given at the fringe or the outskirts of the city of Somnath. That is an interesting thing. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ranabir, we have to actually wind up. Just let me read a comment by our young colleague, Vijay Ramdas, Dr. Vijay Ramdas. Superb, he has made some observations, but no question. Superb illuminating talk and in understanding not just of economic and maritime history, but also business history. Thank you, Professor Chakravarti. Monopolistic ideologies began to play with the European countries, entered into maritime speciality across globe. Salt monopoly was orchestrated by the English East India Company since the time of Hastings on the east and west coast of India, displacing local salt manufacturers in favor of the British until early 20th century. Global trade and commerce activities during the 10th and 12th centuries were fascinating through the letters of Indian Jewish traders explained through your talk. It sheds a new limelight for those of us who didn't know, in contrast to the European overseas trade and commerce, which led to the colonization and exploitation of conquered countries. This was just a comment. And just last, if you just in one line can answer Malini's question. Yes, she is asking, she thanks you for your fascinating presentation. I would be interested to know if the Geniza papers indicate any interactions with the Indian trading groups like the Ayavole, 500 Swamis of Ayavole, in procuring items like betel nuts or cardamom. And then we shall have the vote of thanks after you.
The letter does not mention any particular merchant groups, and Malini knows it so well. In fact, it was Malini who helped me sort of uncovered the mystery of the Padiyar. It was through her suggestion that I could look into the Padiyar. Thanks a lot. But there is no reference to either the Manigramam. They could come, the Jewish merchants could have formed a part of Manigramam organization. But no Jewish records speak of the group identity of, say, Ayavole or Nanadeshi or Ubhay Nanadeshi. But interestingly, some of the Geniza documents speak of the South Indian individual merchants were obviously suppliers to the shipping groups at the coastal side, like some of the iron ore, obviously, or the iron ingots were being supplied by people like Susetti. Could be some Shishu Setti or something like that. Some Chettiar group is there. There are some other names also who were responsible for forwarding iron products from interior onto Mangalore or Dabattanam, and therefrom the merchant like Ben Ezra would arrange for their shipping towards further west to Aden and then further afield.
Yeah.
So the presence of the indigenous Tamil speaking or Kannadi speaking merchants are there, but not in their group formation. That I have not come across.
Thank you very much for this discussion also. And I thank all the, now, of course, there is this formal proposal of vote of thanks by our head of the department, Professor Bhangya Bhukia. So Bhangya, would you please propose your vote of thanks?
Okay, thank you, Sujendra. Okay, so I propose a customary, vote of thanks on behalf of School of Economics and Department of History, and of course on my own behalf to all of you, and particularly Professor Ranabir Chakravarti. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation and giving a very delighted lecture for this evening. I also thank our moderator, Professor Suchandra Ghosh, and the coordinators, Dr. Varghese and Professor Ramana Murthy, and all the audience and technical supporting Pranay. So thank you once and all to all. Okay, bye. Have a good evening.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Ranabir.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.